and I'm here to introduce our next session, which is on viewability, non-human traffic, fraudulent impressions, and brand safety. We couldn't come up with an overall name, so we just listed everything. And the moderator for this session is going to be Scott McDonald, who's the president of NOMOS Research in USA.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for staying true to the cause straight through to the end. This is the home stretch. I will be inviting the panel to come up on the stage in a moment, but first we do have a poll. We actually have a pre- and post-poll for those of you who have your mobile devices ready. This is a question kind of related to our topic, but a behavioral question. So I'm curious among the people in the room, how many of you have personally read a viewability report for any website or ad campaign within the last 6 months? It's kind of just a reality check. And if you have, then you tweet 119498 to @poll. And if you have not, or you can't quite recall, you would tweet those other numbers to it. And we will see what happens. I don't know where that comes up. So this is a little bit of a deja vu all over again event. For those of you who were in Seville last March, I guess it was. So those of you who were in Seville last March might remember, again, toward the end of the conference, we had a session on viewable impressions. And just to, kind of calibrate how long ago a year ago was, we were at that point in the United States on the verge of lifting the sort of advisory that had sort of restrained agencies from trying to use viewable impressions as a standard as accepted industry practice. So we were really just on the threshold of that gateway opening in the US. And viewable impressions was still being deeply studied in Europe, but they hadn't quite brought a standard forward for general use in those markets. There were a lot of debates at that point about how accurate our viewable impressions measurements were, and that was the focus of a lot of the discussion. George Ivie reported on a reconciliation study that had pointed the way towards some methods of improving the disparate viewable impression findings of different vendors in the space who were asked to analyze the same campaign and alas did not come to a sufficiently common number of estimates for that. So it was very much a work in progress a year ago, and now we are 1 year later and the conversation has moved considerably forward, and I think that will be part of what we are talking about today. So I'd like to invite all of the panelists to come up to the stage. And again, any of you who are tweeting today can continue to try to answer that question. We'll have another one later on. So our panelists today include Alison Fennah from IAB Europe, who is well known to this group. Amaya Garbayo, who is Associate Director of Insights and Planning, Analytics and Portfolio Solutions from Kellogg Company in the US. George Ivie from the Media Ratings Council in the US. Richard Foan, who is Group Executive Director of Communication and Innovation from ABC Europe, based in the UK. And a late program substitution of Duncan Trigg, who's standing in for Richard Good, I believe, and Duncan is the VP of Ad Effectiveness for comScore UK. And let's start with you, Alison.
Thank you, Scott. So I'm Alison. I manage the business services initiatives of IAB Europe. So IAB Europe's mission is to grow the digital advertising market, and we do that in cooperation with a growing number of network of IABs across Europe, now about 30, and an increasing number of corporate members. So the projects that I'm going to talk about today are carried out thanks to the many IAB Europe members who've helped us. So if you're in the room, Thank you for that. So I am going to do a bit of big picture painting and try to put viewability and quality issues within the context of what the digital industry in Europe needs to do in order to grow its market. So within that, I'll be talking about a little bit about measurement overall, programmatic, and the quality agenda. So first, a little bit about growth drivers. So each year we publish an ADEX benchmark report, which hopefully everyone is familiar with. And these are the things which we showed most recently are driving digital growth across Europe. Video, social media, mobile, we've talked about these things throughout the conference, and yet it strikes me that there are still many challenges. And one of the challenges which I think kind of comes from, you'll see the list up here, insufficient brand spend, that's kind of caused by some of the issues underneath there, fragmentation of formats, limited video inventory, and a continuing debate around measurement. So what we've tried to do at IAB Europe is to bring some of these issues together and create a program to tackle them. I'd point you all towards the bottom issue, regulation. So currently we have a team of people in Brussels beavering away on the review of the Data Protection Directive. And whilst we've talked about lots of really important data issues over the last couple of days at the conference, I would say that focusing on what's happening overall in our market in terms of regulation and data is critical for us. So within IAB Europe, we structured this brand advertising, programmatic, and research and insights. We think that programmatic is going to be the key to drive scale across digital for brand advertisers. So it's incredibly important that we get programmatic right. And in order to do that, we've come up with several initiatives. So we've published a pan-European programmatic advertising white paper, which gives you an idea of what's happening in programmatic in each market. We've sized programmatic, so it's worth about 2.2 billion euros, which is about 20% of the European display market. We've conducted methodology workshops with the local IABs to try to make sure that local vocabulary and sizing in each local market is done in a uniform way, and we have an educational program for each of the stakeholder groups. We'll be expanding this later this year. We also, I think something that's important for this audience, have a survey which has just been launched, targeted at advertisers, agencies and publishers, to give us their opinions on what are the key drivers and the key barriers to developing a programmatic advertising strategy. So whether you are on the beach or doing other things tomorrow, I would urge you towards our website, research section, complete the 10-minute survey. So here's our brand advertising framework. We've split this into 3 areas: ad formats, measurement blueprint, and audience segments and quality. Viewable impressions fits into audience segments and quality, and it's clearly key to ensuring a quality environment within digital. We've just published a measurement blueprint, and we've also just created a measurement organisations forum, because we think that it is vital at this point in time that the measurement organisations across Europe, be they at the moment digital or TV, come together and discuss best practice more regularly. The session that we saw earlier today was incredibly valuable, but really I've spent a lot of time recently urging people to come together and talk more about digital measurement. It's incredibly important. So here are the measurement priorities from our blueprint: better understanding of how online channels work together, having the option to integrate data from other audience surveys, establishing an industry-wide accepted currency, and also having a core set of effectiveness KPIs. Now, beyond that, viewability was rated 84% within this survey, so 4 out of 5 advertisers gave viewability an 84% rating in terms of something that we needed to fix quickly. So what we did in order to do that was we developed the first pan-European viewable impressions white paper. So you can download that and see across Europe what the local developments are on viewability. So whether there's an actual standard in place, whether there's a de facto standard, whether there are discussions going on within each local market, and then we have all of these markets talking together with us about having a minimum European standard. Now, minimum European standard on this topic is difficult, but it's nevertheless important that we continue the dialogue and come to a conclusion on that. So we have a workshop series going on. We develop special groups for publishers to address the challenges and talk about their experiences together. And obviously, the other challenge which we are going to move on to do is to discuss viewability across other platforms. So quality, and what I wanted to share with you here was the need, and we discussed this earlier in the group that came together to discuss this topic in the breakout session. How do we ensure quality in digital, and why is that so important? Well, I think it's important because whilst we can have a session like this that's entitled Viewability, Fraudulent Impressions, Brand Safety, whatever, to me it's important that we enunciate what is quality within digital and what are the components that make quality, and that we communicate that to the market and to brand advertisers in particular. So what we've done here is we've, if you like, created a lexicon of quality, and these are all topics that we're going to be exploring over the coming months in terms of how to communicate to the market that we are continually enhancing the digital environment. So the top priority on those is that delivery topic in the bottom right-hand corner. That's where viewability and brand safety and non-human traffic sit, and also the importance of reaching intended target groups. So just very lastly, our activities focus on stakeholder needs and cooperation, the need to learn from global initiatives and also the local markets, and to deliver pan-European and locally relevant solutions. And in that, act like a brand, talk about quality, talk about the good things about digital, whilst at the same time fixing the pipes. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amaya Garbayo. I work for Kellogg company. I do digital analytics and in targeting, and I'm happy to see that we have quite a crowd, considering that this is one of the last two sessions of the conference, so I'm very happy to have you all here listening to what we have to say regarding viewability, non-human traffic, and brand safety. I typically walk a lot, and they didn't mic me up, but I'll do my best to not to move so you guys can hear me. And pass the slides. Okay, and I'm going to walk you through a couple of things. The first one of them is what we call the media playbook. This is a summary of our beliefs and what helped Kellogg company put viewability and non-human traffic at the center of our KPIs. The first couple of slides are going to walk you through our philosophy and how we think about measurement. And again, this is what has allowed us to put all our focus and all our energy in viewability. We're going to show you some of the results we've gotten because of all that hyper-focus in those metrics. And then we're going to show you where we are. I think on the same spirit that Sean O'Neill was talking about how to present the data to our senior leadership. This is our best foot forward to try to simplify a very, very complex topic for the organization so the organization has the focus on the right places and on the right KPIs. And then I told you what I think the future holds, but I'm looking forward to the discussion on that. So Kellogg Digital Playbook, transparency, measure what matters, investment follow performance, and fewer, better, bigger partners. Transparency, not only on cost, but on placement and everything that that entails. It is critically important for not only Kellogg, but every advertiser out there to understand where is the value creation, where is the chain of contribution to your campaign, and that cannot be happening without transparency. We require that all our partners provide information to the URL level, on the domains, as well as understand every single media and technology fee. And we require third-party tagging for verification. And this is critically important because when I said investment follow performance, if you don't understand where the value is created and where you're spending your money, you cannot do that. On the previous item on following ensuring that you measure what matters, right? Kellogg looks at 3 buckets of metrics. We're going to concentrate on the one in the middle highlighted here, the reaching the right audience, but we look at the quality of our content. We think about our advertising as the content we put forward. We also look to put that content in front of the right people. And here is where things like viewability and non-human traffic, as well as target index and reach and frequency are critical. Because if you don't reach your audience, you can hardly have an impact. And then the last bucket is what was the impact? Did you impact your ROI, your sales, and your return on ad spend? So measuring what matters. What you see in here and those numbers on the side are what we monitor for every campaign, for every placement. The viewability, we require our campaigns to have 70% viewability. We look at how well targeted that was campaign, and we look at 50% more than our fair share of the consumer we're going after. We want to reach at least 20 million uniques. We know how important reach is for our business and how it's, to date, one of the best predictors of sales. We look at not to overwhelm those consumers with frequency. We want our non-human traffic to be under 5%. And then we look at sites, categories, and private exchanges as a way to monitor our brand safety. And I was talking about how to talk to our senior leadership about viewability and some of those extremely complex topics. And this is how we do it, right? We try to showcase what is the impact of that metric in your business. We looked at campaigns that had less than 50% viewability and then more than 50% viewability, and it shows how the effectiveness and the return on investment isn't plotted in here, but it was exactly the same trajectory. The more viewability that your campaign has, the biggest the impact. And I'm sure that that's not shocking to anybody, but what this did for us is allow us to put the investment for the measurement and validate that the partner that we were working with actually could measure viewability, that measures something that was a signal for our business. This was critically important and still is today to verify and confirm that we are actually, in fact, measuring what matters. Here is the other piece of that, right? Once you have your principles and you know what matters, you make sure your investment is allocated in a way that makes sense back to that. So if you look at the pie chart on the left-hand side, you'll see that when we began this process back in 2012, about a third, and a third of our campaigns were in the green, in the yellow, meaning not so good, and then in the red with really, really low viewability. Today, this is data for the last quarter of 2014, 71% of our campaigns are up to standard. Sorry. Now, when I joined the company about 2 years ago, some of this work was already done, but what wasn't done is the next step, right? We were looking at viewability for display and thinking about our next biggest investment, thinking about video. At the time, the MRC did not have yet a definition of viewability, and we did not have any partners that we knew of that could put together a viewability metric, viewability measurement for us, but we knew this. And we knew that it was so important for our business to figure it out that we undertook a relatively large RFP to determine who could help us with this problem. I'm running out of time. So one of the things that we also do is fewer, better, bigger partnerships. And that got us here, got us to a situation where we have really good scores on viewability and very low fraud, relatively moderate frequency. And looking to the future to see what is it that we're going to encounter. I've been told in every conference that I've been to that getting 100% everywhere in my KPIs is not possible. But I think it might be. And I'm looking forward to the discussion with my colleagues to see how can we do that.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm George Ivie. I'm with the Media Rating Council in the U.S. We set standards, we audit products and accredit products, and we've been kind of on the front end, or the kind of the bleeding front end of viewability for probably 5 years now. I'm going to give you a status update from the MRC's perspective. First, just as a level set, what's the standard? This is the MRC standard, so I'm not talking about a standard in your country. If you're outside the U.S., there are individual, country decisions being made, but what's going on in the U.S. We've set a standard that basically says 50% of the pixels need to be in view for 1 second for a display ad. 50% of the pixels need to be in view for 2 seconds for a video ad. We set a special rule to lower that threshold for very large size interactive ads, which in the US we call rising stars, or the IAB has coined the term rising stars. They're very hard to get viewable sometimes, so we lowered that threshold. A couple of key points. You're probably sitting there, if you're a marketer or somebody who really understands a business, probably most of you do, and you're going, this crazy guy George, why did he set a 1 second standard? How does that have anything to do with my brand advertising message? The key point is that's not what it was for. This standard is an opportunity to see standard. It basically is taking the non-viewable inventory out of the equation, and it's creating a qualifying moment to include that impression in an audience-based currency standard, which we're currently working on. So I could have been more politically correct probably by creating the audience-based currency standard and then saying as part of that, to qualify, you need to have 50% of the pixels in 1 second or 2 seconds. But because of some very complex things around changing the ecosystem, we wanted to roll out the viewable impression first. But the key message is, it's not a brand transfer standard, it's setting an opportunity to see the minimum qualifying criteria. How did we do that? We studied billions of advertisements. We looked at when people took action on those advertisements, they X'd out of them, they clicked on them, etc. We looked at curves on how people interacted with the advertising, and we were trying to identify that moment just before action was taken, so that somebody had the opportunity to see the ad, but they had not yet actually made the move to either act on the ad or get away from the ad or something like that. That's the statistical moment that we picked. We analyzed the data looking for statistically significant levels of user interaction and set the threshold before that. Some of these percentages we're going to have to evaluate on an ongoing basis because as the internet changes, these thresholds may need to change. I think I just explained this too, because in the interest of economy of time. So what does this say? Big message here. Right now, most of us are still trading on a currency of served ad impressions. It's a bad thing. A lot of them are not viewable. It's not good. Today, we're trying to change that currency increasingly to be based on viewable impressions. But we're jumping to kind of an interim step. We really want to jump to a long step ahead, major progress, which is a currency based on audience characteristics. And then people can not only evaluate whether it's viewable, it's filtered for invalid traffic, but they can also see whether it's in target for your characteristics. That's where we want to go with the project. And all those standards projects are happening. The MRC has been assisting with transition. We've been doing vendor reconciliation projects. Scott mentioned one that we talked about at the last ICOM session. Believe it or not, those are still going on. They've been pretty intense. We've announced several items of guidance to close that gap, and we believe that gap has significantly narrowed. We've released implementation guidance. If you're a marketer or an agency and you want to adopt viewable impressions, what are the key points you need to consider when you adopt a viewable impression process? We published that. And we're using our accreditation process of vendors to tighten these procedures, like increasing their measured rates and things like that, so that slowly they need to improve. Not even so slowly, they're having to improve a lot. And that's working very well. What you should recognize is viewability will never be static. The technology behind viewability is dynamic. It's changing. It's becoming more and more complex every day, but we believe it's still feasible to measure it well. There's a big debate surrounding adoption, at least in the United States. One key thing, we believe there isn't a 100% viewable campaign that we know of. Ads can be 100% viewable, but a campaign, they're ranging between single digits all the way up to sometimes the 80s. Viewable inventory is very scarce, especially if you're a marketer and you want to trade on 100% viewable inventory. What you need to keep in mind is you're greatly reducing supply. Relative to served impressions, we had more served impressions. We were crawling with served impressions. We're not crawling with viewable impressions. The sell side is really struggling with optimization of that. They need to change their websites. They need to manage all the vendors in the process, who pays for the viewability decisions, et cetera. That has been a struggle and a point of intense pressure. The buy side, when you speak to marketers and agencies, they're really struggling with why should they ever pay for a non-viewable impression again? Why should we do that? We know that those are basically worthless impressions. And we suggest that you really negotiate in advance, test with your viewability vendors, allow time for optimization of your major seller partners, enhance the stewardship of your campaigns while you're doing this, and then tighten terms in line to move towards, if you're at 70 today, a year from now, maybe you should be at 75, et cetera. What's on the horizon for us? The audience-based currency standards, they're in process. We've been messing around with viewable impressions, but we're working on that. We're working on mobile viewability standards. In fact, we're about to release some interim guidance on that, so keep an eye out for that. We're issuing a big new set of guidance on filtering invalid traffic. Very, very big project that we've been working on with over 200 companies. So keep an eye open for that. That's really going to raise the bar. And then there are some other standards here: engagement metrics, view-through metrics, and cleaning up ad effectiveness work. That's on the horizon for us. Mobile viewable impressions, just so that you know, it's challenging. Flash doesn't operate in iOS. Communication and battery conservation is an issue. We can no longer really rely on a single focus state in mobile devices. They're becoming more complex with tabs in the browsers and things like that. In apps, we're going to have to rely on SDK approaches and developing, hopefully, common SDK approaches. Right now, we don't know of a technical solution to determine the visibility of the area of the ad in an app. That has to be worked on. There's a lot of general challenges. We still have iframes because we can't execute Flash. I'm out of time, but I'm out of slides too. The hook. I don't breathe. Richard.
Good afternoon, everyone. That's not bad. Try one more. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Just to keep that theme going, Scott asked me to help you concentrate. So one of you has a gold star stuck under your seat, and that person will join us on the panel to recap what I'm about to tell you. Okay? Should just help you a little bit. No, not at all, including you, George. Okay, so I'm Richard Foan. I chair the first of these three logos, JICWebs, which is a UK cross-industry body. I also work with Pedro da Silva, who is the president of the IFABC, which is getting on for 40 ABCs around the world, including Tom Douillard, who's also here from ABC in the States. And we've had Spain here and France and others as well. And the third one is the company that actually pays me out of all those, which is ABC, the UK Audit Bureau of Circulations. These four topics, to cover them in what is now 6 minutes, is obviously hilarious, really. But what I'm going to do is just give you the top line of what's going on from my perspective. And I'm going to do it to emphasize these three principles. The first one is that we have to continue to work together, like George and I do, and the other ABCs do, to develop global standards as a minimum, and then build those for local and regional markets where those markets are ready. Secondly, as you heard from Kellogg's a moment ago, we have to do this with realism. I do believe you're right, that this will never be 100%. But we can do a better job of, as Alison said, promoting the positives as we build this transparency along the way. So, JICWebs, who are they? Joint Industry Committee for Web Standards. Those 5 logos underneath that subject line tell you which organisations are represented. From the left, the AOP is the major digital media owners, including broadcasters in the UK market. The second one, the IAB, many of you have heard of. They represent the key infrastructure providers and some of the commercial tool operators. The third one is ISBAR, which in the States is the ANA, in Brussels is the WFA. Over 400 of the top UK advertisers, including Unilever, P&G. The IPA, or 4As in the States, or EACA in Brussels, representing the advertising agencies. And the last group is the traditional news brand owners, national newspapers like the London Times, etc., and the regional newspapers. Underneath that, you can see some of the areas that we've been working on over the last few years. And you'll see the third one there specifically references BARB, the TV measurement organisation. And we underpin the work that Kantar are doing in that context, for example. So the 4 areas, viewability, we issued a report last November on some of the viewability tools, and it does not say whether the tool is right or wrong, and it does not say whether they guarantee to measure 50 by 1. What it does is give transparency on how they measure the amount of the ad that may be in view or on the screen, or whether they're measuring the container that the ad is going to be placed in. Just one of the many reasons for discrepancies that George was alluding to. And that report is public and available for you on the website. It helps educate and help people understand why there are discrepancies, and increasingly over time, working with George and the other organisations, reducing those discrepancies closer to single figures. On-scroll are in the scheme as well, but have not been included in the report yet. Second one, non-human traffic, which we can come back next week and spend the whole week on. All I wanted to emphasise is that a basic foundation, you have access to a global list of robots and spiders built by the IAB in New York, ABC in the UK, and facilitated by Tom's team in the States through the IM Services Group. Many other people are involved in that and contribute to evolving that list every month. And I've stuck Larry's quote on there because it's nice to get Larry to praise something. That's really good. Thank you, Larry. Shouldn't have said that, should I? But there you go. Third one, anti-fraud. Just starting that journey in the UK market, and what I wanted to show you was the scale, breadth, both globally and areas they operate in, of the organisations that have chosen to be involved. Right the way across the spectrum, including the practitioners who claim to help reduce the risk of fraud by tracking it and measuring it, etc. And the fourth one, brand safety, which I mentioned a year ago. That seal on the left-hand side is what an organisation gets if it's demonstrated through independent review that it complies with the principles that JICWebs has agreed. And that silly blue line at the bottom with lots of letters that you can't read is just a link to an update report we issued in February of this year. 43 signatories. Those ones there are the ones that have had the seal, and you'll see that includes agencies, not just the intermediaries. And another group that are in the middle of being reviewed and hopefully certified soon. The CV tools, or content verification tools, underpin all that work if they're chosen to be used. And today we've just updated a report at midday today on 3 players who have been independently reviewed and are in that report. And they're not just a pass or fail. It gives you lots of criteria down the left-hand side of how they work, and across the top, which tool, and then the boxes that you can't read on there are either simply yes or no. So how do they operate, and do they do certain things? So it's a useful way of understanding, again, why there are discrepancies, but importantly, how to choose a tool that can help you. Those are the three principles on which all of that is based. It's about increasing trust, engagement, don't know how that happened, engagement across the whole industry, and getting the key players to be part of what we do. That slide I've added at the end just has a bunch of links for you to those reports, which may help you when you get the deck off Andreas later on. Thank you very much. And now Duncan's going to explain to you why they got involved with that whole process. Have fun.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Duncan Trigg. I'm VP for Ad Effectiveness at comScore International. When I was told yesterday that I needed to talk on brand safety, viewability, and fraud in 7 minutes, I thought, oh. So what I wanted to do was to concentrate on what I think are the three core areas that are A, holding back the industry, and B, need to be addressed if this is going to move forward. That entails what is a verified impression. If we can't agree what a verified impression is, I think we're in for a rocky road. I also think that the issue of publishers not seeing the information that is provided for them when advertisers and agencies are using content verification tools is also having a significant impact, so I wanted to touch on that. And lastly, I just wanted to underline the need and the importance of the audits and the verification of the verification tools themselves. So I thought I'd start with what's actually happening out there. These are our latest benchmarks, which we released recently, and they show in view and in target. And you can see that they're all at or hovering around just above or just below the 50% mark. So it's been alluded to several times already in the conversation this afternoon. People are starting to talk about 100% viewability and buying against it and cutting out fraud on a complete basis. I think the reality of the situation, the next step for the market, is to look at how verification tools and understanding of this issue can help to increase ROI. And it was very interesting to see the impact that increasing viewability had with the earlier presentation. So, what is a verified impression? I think at the heart of it is it's relatively simple. Could the ad have actually been seen by a human eye, and was it in a relevant environment for your brand? If there are no's in that, then it shouldn't be regarded as a viewable, as a verified impression. And I want to illustrate just a small point that has a huge impact on side-by-side comparisons when viewability tools are run on the same campaign. Bots are very intelligent, and they're becoming more and more intelligent. They have HTML functionality that serves in advertising. They scroll. They can deliver above the fold and below the fold. They see the same benchmarks that the rest of us see, and they can mirror viewability rates. If you're calculating a viewability rate without taking out non-human traffic beforehand, the picture's false. And I think it's incredibly important that the market understands that, because there is a great deal of discrepancies between the various vendors. And viewability, as we can see, is a hugely important factor in influencing campaigns. So at comScore, you might have seen some of these slides that are coming up at the presentation that we did at the beginning of the week that Cameron gave on industry trust. We're very keen now to move the conversation away from the negativity of what's happening out there and look at how verification tools and understanding viewability, fraud, and brand safety can have an impact on enhancing quality. So is there quality out there? The good news is, there is quality out there. And when you actually look at individual publishers on an individual publisher level, 95% of the top 100 properties in MMX have fraud of less than 5%. It's great news. The same is true, or similar stats are available showing through the video metrics top 100%, it's 91%. But of course, and unfortunately, the scenario is not as simple as that. When you drill down into various areas of these sites, you start to see spikes of traffic as high as 20% non-human traffic. Now, this is a conversation that I could go on for hours about with regards to whether that is buying in traffic for getting away larger campaigns. Domain hijacking is also a vital important there. But the point is, there is quality in programmatic, and using verification tools can help you find it. So just a little bit about industry trust. I know some of you would have already seen the presentation earlier, but I wanted to talk particularly about brand safety, viewability, and fraud within this. The idea at the heart of our industry trust program is to create a level playing field of information that both the buyers and the sellers can see. The reality of the situation is those that have been using content verification tools for the last couple of years have decided and seen results that have created perceptions of particular publishers and environments, and in programmatic as a whole, that the publishers themselves are not aware of. So for the first time, using the comScore trust profiles, publishers are actually able to see this information. At the same time, they're able to use tools to optimize this and create an environment that they're happy with, that the market can take out and start to trade against. And the same is true with sellers. And I'll come on to a little bit more detail in that now. The information that's in there is currently threefold, and we will be involving demographics later on in the year. We've pulled in information from MMX and Video Metrics on audience and category rankings. We've used several years' worth of global data from our verification tool VCE to calculate the viewability rates. And using the panel, the census data, and a VCE, we've calculated non-human traffic rates on a publisher level as well. So with regards to publishers, as I said, this is the first time that a lot of publishers have seen these numbers or have taken them seriously. And if you are a publisher and you haven't yet looked at your numbers, which are now available, they launched in January in the US and April 1st for the rest of the world, you can, through your comScore interface, now see this data. And for the sellers, for the buyers, the ability later in the year, it's launching now within regards to a number of DSPs that we're currently partnering with and integrating with. You'll be able to start using this data to set your benchmarks that you're happy with. And I think the reality of the situation has been alluded to several times already this afternoon is 100% is unrealistic. Set your benchmarks and increase them and understand what it has, the impact on the ROI of the campaign. The same is true with non-human traffic, and the same is true with brand safety and the audience data. The point being that this is a level playing field for the first time. At the heart of a lot of the confusion in the marketplace is point vendors and CV tools running on similar campaigns on the sell side are influencing the perception of programmatic as a whole. Industry Trust for the first time is creating a trading ecosystem where people can actually input from both sides to create a currency that works for all concerned and something that everyone can evolve with. And the last point, with the last 20-odd seconds, is to say that at comScore, as much as we'd love to believe that everyone will believe everything we say, we welcome and have actively participated in the audits and the processes that have been involved in the accreditation side of the business. And I think that any vendor that isn't doing that, then, you know, there you go. But I think the importance is that they need to evolve with the vendors themselves in order for us to tackle this problem as a wider issue. And that is exactly on 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for minding the time so scrupulously. I'd like to start, and we'll throw it open to the audience in a moment, but I'd like to start really with a factual question which may not be answerable, but you may have some inkling of it. As of right now, in the various markets of UK, Europe, and the US, what % of the display and or video ad buys, would you guess, are currently being negotiated on the basis of viewable impressions? Do you have any idea? I mean, just a sense?
Very low percentage.
Use the mic if you can. I think they're saying a low percentage. I mean, and
very low percentage.
It might accord a little bit with what seemed to be, if I remember, about a 50% of this audience saying that they'd actually looked at a viewability report. So that may be indicative of that. Several of the presentations alluded, and I think you particularly, Alison, alluded to the difference between viewability and engagement, and George referred to it as well. So viewability might be conceived of as a necessary but not sufficient condition for engagement with an ad or any other kinds of metrics. Do you see us, and this is across the board, I'd be interested in your view as well, Amaya, as on a path now that actually leads us eventually to industry standards about engagement? Are we, 2 and 3 years from now going to be debating how to measure duration accurately and fairly across, or some other, repeat traffic, or some other measures of engagement that maybe aren't currently part of the planning thinking right now?
So from my perspective, I think that digital media from its inception, and I've been involved since the once mighty Excite, has always been a victim of its own reporting capabilities. And to be viewing campaigns as 100% viewable and only paying for viewable inventory is to put on digital a criteria that is just not relevant on any other platform or any other advertising platform. I think it's far more important that we look at the efficiencies that increasing viewabilities can make to an ROI and to track through, and this is one of the reasons we're so excited about our partnership with Kantar, is to look at what impact does verified inventory have ultimately on the success of the campaign. It might be that a 5% increase in viewability has a 20% ROI factor. It might be 1%. But to chase after viewable inventory for the sake of it as a number is not to really understand the benefit of it. We don't in press, for example, when you're buying your inside right front cover, you're not selling that on a viewability rate. I think it's more to do with understanding what changing these metrics has on campaign performance.
On the other hand, though, at least in the United States, if a viewer fast forwards through a commercial or has the audio off, the advertiser doesn't pay for it. So, I mean, there is some step in the process here in other media of trying to have an analogous measure. But I'd be interested in what others think about this idea of the border between engagement and viewable impressions.
So we today currently consider viewability as the ground zero level, right? Below that, there is no value in it. But we optimize against other engagement metrics, either more time or, as what I was showing on the slide, something that we call audible and viewable on complete for the videos in particular, but that could apply to display as well. I hope that a few years from now, we are not still talking about this topic and the tools allow us to optimize against the metric that we think is what we should do. The only issue with the standards on things that are up the stream is that it will not work for every advertiser. Some advertisers with more complex message will need more time. I might need less time, or I might have assets that are better and do not require so many exposures, so much time. So I think the measurement should be there. I think it should be third-party independent. I think the MRC and other bodies need to be there to help us regulate what that looks like. But I think the ROI specifically is individual to every advertiser, and it's going to be really hard to try to standardize across that. What we should have a standardization on is the metrics and the tools that are going to help us do the best job we can with our investment.
Okay. You
I just wanted, so the vision of part of the project that we're engaged in is to create a duration-weighted, audience characteristic-based currency that's viewable and filtered from invalid traffic. That's the vision. Now, you've seen how difficult viewability is. I like to tell people that viewability is disruptive. When you get to in-target impressions, that's just as disruptive because a lot of people aren't trading on that now. We do have a project on our agenda to set standards around some key engagement metrics. You'd have to boil the ocean to do everything, but prioritize and pick a few, as well as begin a program of research on view-through, the importance of certain impressions in the funnel of the purchase process, which again is subject to a lot of variability, but that is on the agenda.
All right. I'm sorry, Alison, go ahead.
So yeah, I'd just like to say I agree with both of those. The reason that we surveyed all of the advertisers and the rest of the community and put the results of that into our blueprint really was to emphasize the need for a core set of metrics, and that's absolutely what we're going to try to achieve over the coming years.
And Richard?
Just to round that from the perspective of the UK market with JICWebs, they've specifically agreed step one is to educate and help people understand how this stuff works, how the tools work. Step two is to independently verify whether the tools are applying those principles, and that leads you to where you are now. Help you actually then make your own decisions on what numbers you want. If you talk to Facebook or you've talked to NewsCore, you'll get two totally different ideas of how long something should be. They're both right for their own purposes, but the transparency about how it's counted and the independent verification is what the markets ask us for at this stage.
Right. So last year in Seville, when we talked about this, and that we'd had this first reconciliation study that had been released by the MRC, the vendors that were analyzing a common set of data, a common campaign, came up with estimates that were, quite disparate. As I recall, was approaching 50% variability in the first pass, which is not really what you want for a currency, for a trading currency. So there were a bunch of steps that were taken, recommendations for, procedural steps, definitional changes, a sequence of operations, and other very practical technical steps to get these to converge. Given the work that's been done since then, how far are we toward that? And if you're a publisher or an ad agency, what would be the 3 questions that you'd want to ask a prospective viewability vendor to help decide, who you subscribe to their service?
I'll go first this time, then you can pile in, George. So from the UK perspective again, the first thing is the really positive news that progress is in the right direction. That's subjective. There's a lot of discussion whether discrepancies are reducing. We haven't done a detailed in-depth report again like George did, but that doesn't mean that people aren't doing their own research, but it's definitely going in the right direction. Second thing is that there is more understanding of the causes of those discrepancies, which has helped people actually get closer to what's really going on as well. And the third bit is, as that builds out, and George does his next piece of information that he'll be publishing very soon, I'm sure, that will help reinforce the ownership and the responsibility of everybody taking their share of making this stuff work better.
When we wrote the served impression standard many years ago, at that point in time, after we audited and verified a bunch of vendors, you saw counting discrepancies, and they were pretty big. We then did a reconciliation, issued a bunch of guidance, and those generally came to within 5% of each other. And that's our goal in this situation. We've done 2 reconciliation studies. One question you should ask is your vendor in compliance with the reconciliation guidance? Because if they are, those numbers are going to be very closely in line. They're going to be less than 10% off, is the studying that we have. We still have one major problem, and that is we have some large ad servers, original ad servers, that still use something called count on decision. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's basically counting a served ad impression early in the process, which we thought was okay back 15 years ago, but now it turns out that a bunch of those ads don't actually rent. So we're trying to disallow that technique. Some of the large ad servers haven't implemented that. That's causing about 10% of the discrepancies that you see in large ad serving environments compared to the viewability vendors who are not ad servers. But that's just some overall.
Okay, Duncan, you had a comment?
So I think the core methodology behind how viewability tools work, the browser optimization, which is effectively the second generation moving on from geometric, it's largely similar amongst vendors. But I alluded to earlier in my presentation that things like not accounting for non-human traffic can have a material impact on it. Things like, does the tool of choice analyze whether there are multiple tags open and is the ad in view on a tag that's not being seen or outside the viewport. These are things that are open, and these are the things that are being audited. Unfortunately, it requires you to look into it a little bit more to understand it, but these have material impacts on the actual viewability rates and the difference on side-by-side comparison tests. So I think it is if we're going to take this seriously, the industry has to get and understand the core methodology of what you want from a viewability provider to understand the kind of numbers that you'll see.
Just as a point of information,
Sure.
the handling of invalid traffic and ordering it in the viewability decision process is part of the reconciliation guidance. So if you follow that, you should be pretty good from that standpoint. And we do see that the ability to identify invalid traffic varies widely between vendors. Some vendors don't even try to do it much. That's not in their remit, you know, as an organization. And then you have some vendors who do it intensely, like comScore. They do it intensely. And so if you're automatically comparing those two vendors and you're not handling, as Duncan said, if you're not pulling those out at the right time, you have very skewed viewability statistics. That's a part of the reconciliation guidance.
How about questions from the floor? Yes, down here. Go ahead and belt it out.
I wonder why a lot of people talk about viewability percentages rather than cost per viewable impression. And the question is, what's better? The vendor selling 70% viewability at $2 or another vendor selling 35% viewability at $1?
So we did that math. We brought arithmetic back to marketing and we did the math. And those things are, if you discount the ad serving cost and your math works, those two things are technically speaking equivalent. One of them has less risk. What we've seen, however, is that given the marketplace today and how much the advertisers, other advertisers know about this particular topic, trading on viewable impressions at the cost that the publisher is willing to offer that guaranteed 100% viewability might not be the smartest thing to do for all advertisers out there. But I think the math is quite simple on that end to figure out. I think there is still room in the marketplace to take advantage of viewability tools and keep your CPMs lower, the effective CPM viewable under what a publisher perhaps will sell it for you. I don't know how long that's going to last. We certainly, I'm here to tell you we're not expecting to pay more for viewable impressions. We do not want to pay more for viewable impressions. We're not going to pay more for viewable impressions.
Go ahead,
If I could just make a related point. It's not exactly on your point, but it gave me a thought that I wanted to communicate. Early on, when viewability first came out, we were trying to measure how it worked in campaigns, and the 3MS project had rolled out this principle that said everybody should do viewable impressions. We started looking at the tech, and we found out it didn't work well. So we put out an advisory, and that's what we were lifting at the last ICOM meeting. One of the reasons why we had that advisory is because the measurability rate was low. So out of all the impressions in the campaign, if you could only measure viewability for half of them, let's say, you know, that's a problem because you got half the impressions, you couldn't even tell whether they were viewable or not. And we were actually seeing that situation happen. And now, as part of the accreditation process, we're forcing vendors to have much higher measurability rates because the tech is better and things like browser optimization have come out, which allows you to measure more impressions. So we're not even really accrediting vendors unless their measurability rates are like 75, 80% at least. But you still have some unknown impressions. So right now we put some guidance on the street that says, concentrate on just getting the gross number of viewable impressions you want and de-emphasize the rate calculations for the moment. And we may revisit that as we push those rates up to 90, et cetera. But right now we are saying, sure, look at viewability rates, but really, really concentrate just on the raw impression counts.
Looks like we have time for one more question. I see one up in the balcony. Is that right? Yeah.
Actually, Joshua's than mine. I saw he had his hand up as well. So please, if we have one left.
So Josh.
My question was related to the first one about whether we saw prices increase double digit.
Thank you very much. Well, now about the ad fraud aspect, and just to make sure that we are kind of in tune for next year, because viewability is kind of more the topic of the past, and we've found out that actually it was more related with fraud than we thought. And I would really like to have everybody's opinion, and I'm sure everybody would. What's the rough overall rate of ad fraud right now in the industry? If we look at working media, assuming at one point there's $1, how much of that $1 is eaten outright by ad fraud.
So I can tell you what we've seen. We run a substantial number of impressions, but obviously not, a holistic view. But so what we saw in our first 2 or 3 tests last year is that non-human traffic overall, when you look at the combination of display and video, was under 10% for us, for Kellogg specifically, way under that. But there are pockets of problematic inventory. Video is typically more prone to non-human traffic, and so is Hispanic inventory in the US. Everything that is more scarce or that is less inventory available, we've seen that it's more prone to non-human traffic. So from that perspective, and when you were comparing it to viewability and the numbers that you saw on the screen, viewability, while I think is an easier problem to fix, is a lot bigger in size than non-human traffic for what we've been able to measure to date. It's also an unknown quantity. We don't know how well we're measuring non-human traffic. For all we know, maybe we're only capturing a portion of it, and the number might be really, really high, and we're just not able to pick it up with the tools available today. So with that caveat, what we've seen is non-human traffic smaller.
So we're out of time at the session here, but I'm just curious as to whether anybody else on the panel has an empirical view.
Yeah, I'd like to just hesitate to guess that this time next year we'll be talking about domain hijacking as the main form of fraud out there. I think when, as evident when you're looking at individual publishers having less than 5% non-human traffic when they're analysed as a separate entity, and then you look at the actual programmatic environment with 30, 40, 50% of fraud in there, it's pretty obvious that people are using domain hijacking to claim they are what they're not and put inventory in that we're buying as under the auspices of official traffic.
So slamming is not just a telecom problem. I'll close the session here and thank the panel certainly for a very informative update. And